Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization in, though you can't see it in the shot, sunny Las Vegas, Nevada. Yep, living here for a year with my wife because she has a medical fellowship and I just sort of show up. I don't have a day job. Las Vegas, great place. In Spanish, it means the Vegas. I know, what a kooky joke. Folks, enough of my bullshit humor. Let's get into the real stuff. How to deload for two separate aspects of training, for hypertrophy training and or for strength training, because there's some different applications. But before we get into the differences, let's take a look at the commonalities and start with the purpose of deloading. Why are we deloading at all? There's two things that we need to be concerned with deloading. One is the reason we are deloading, the most important by far, is that we have accumulated fatigue over the last several number of weeks of training, usually 4 to 8 weeks if you're training hard enough and progressing. You will accumulate so much fatigue that your training is no longer maximally productive or anywhere close or not productive at all. This accumulated fatigue has to be dropped so that you can again begin another accumulation phase of harder and harder training to get you more jacked or stronger. That's the thing. Fatigue accumulates, period. If you're training hard enough and every now and again, you have to let it go. It's just like you don't work for, 50 days straight with no weekends. You got to take some time off, have a breather. Just like sleep, you get tired and tired and tired, and you have to sleep and it recharges you. Same thing over the longer term, multiple weeks, multiple months. Eventually, fatigue accumulates and you have to bring it down somehow. Now, that somehow is interesting because we could just be like, why not just take time off? Which brings us to point 2 of why we deload instead of just taking time off, because bringing things down a ton could mean taking time off. And we'll see later that is a viable option, but maybe not the most viable in all cases because of point number 2. We want to try to conserve the adaptations that we've gained over the last XYZ number of weeks of our mesocycle so that we're not losing either anything or not losing it all, right? All that strength you built, all that technical proficiency you built lifting, being in the groove, all that muscle you built, when you take time off, we'll talk about how much time off is too much in just a little bit, but when you take time off completely, some of that hangs in there for a while, some of it starts to recede. If ideally it could recede the smallest bit possible or not recede at all, we get the benefit of both worlds. Huge drop in fatigue to let us restart a new productive meso, and no losses in fitness or minimal losses so we can start and go and go and go and have the most productive back-to-back-to-back training cycles and eventually get bigger and stronger than everyone and find that that's a very lonely place at the top. So here's the thing. Okay, deloading has to be done. Here is the core concept, of how it has to be done. We already know why, to bring down fatigue and to maintain adaptations, but here's the core concept of how. Deloading must be very easy compared to your normal training, Here's the thing. If you're still training hard, in a theoretical sense, what is above your minimum effective dose of training, be that intensity, volume, whatever, if you're still training hard, you are making adaptations. Hypothetically. Otherwise, why the hell are you training hard? If you could make adaptations and bring down fatigue at the same time, why the hell would you ever train in any other mode? If I told you there was a way in which your fatigue would not accumulate and would actually reduce while you made gains, you'd be like, what? Is there a genie involved? Is there a bottle from which the genie emerges with 3 wishes and I already wished for infinite recoverable volume? This is crazy. And it just isn't true. As long as training is hard enough to make you better, as long as training is hard, it does not allow fatigue to meaningfully reduce from a very high point, which means that in order to get the most out of your deload, training has to be below the level of which causes gains. Not so far that it causes mega losses, we'll talk about in a bit, but that level has to be low, right? And any way you choose to slice it, and I'm going to quote Dr. Andrew Fry, I could say colleague of mine, but more like a mentor, top strength sports scientist from Kansas. He said literally to me and other folks in a presentation I heard live about deloading generally, when you hit the brakes, hit them hard. Huge revelation. So whatever we're going to find out about deloading more specifically in the next couple of minutes, we're always going to keep that in the back of our heads. anything we call deloading has to be a really, really, really big break from our normal training. That is, your deload, when you show up and do it, should kind of be like, well, I guess we're in here doing this. If anyone's ever impressed by your deload, like, whoa, you really killed that deload, you're probably doing it wrong. It's much, much easier is the thing. Next question, and we're not going to cover this in depth this time. There's other lectures we're going to be making later that cover this in much more depth, like mesocycle design and so on and so forth, is how often should you deload? Deload, remember, there's other ways to recover that are shorter. There's technique or light sessions. There's half weeks. There's active rest phases, which are longer. Deloading is 1 week in duration. How often do we need to deload in that case? Well, the usual, just more basic grand concept is when you're too fatigued to improve or even maintain your strength. Probably when you're too fatigued to improve your strength is probably a time when deloading is a really, really good idea. If you do not deload, once your strength is no longer going up in any measurable capacity, reps, load, anything, and you're just flatlining and or you're getting ready to actually reduce inabilities, someone could ask you, listen, what are you getting out of this training even though you're not making any strides forward? You could be like, just training, you know? Like, so if you deloaded, the fatigue would clear and you would start to make gains again. You'd be like, yeah. Like, so why aren't you doing that now? Like, I don't know, right? So when you're no longer making gains, when the fatigue has accumulated so much that it's erased your ability to make gains, then it's probably time to deload. Now, how do we know it's not just an off session? Okay. So like last week on Thursday or last week Monday, you squatted, 300 for a couple sets of 10. Okay. And that was a PR. This time you squat 305, but you get like sets of 8 and 7 and 6, but you're trying like 0 RIR. You can't do any more. Could it be that you're not at like your maximum ability and your maximum recoverable volume? Could it be that you could do more and still progress? Maybe. One session, it could just be a bad session. Your boyfriend broke up with you the session before and you're like, no, but I still got to go squat and you suck. Maybe, right? So we want a 2-session confirmation. That's our rule. The way we judge when performance is no longer increasing or decreases is if it does the no longer increasing or decreasing for 2 sessions in a row. And it doesn't have to be 2 weeks in a row, just sessions. So if that Monday your squats went to hell, let's say Thursday you do leg presses. Last week you did whatever number. This week your performance is less. Monday and Thursday, probably not chance, right? It's probably time to do deload. And somebody could say, listen, it's not because I've accumulated so much volume and so much fatigue over this whole meso. I've just had a super duper stressful last week, and that's why I've underperformed. Well, check this out. Stress is cumulative, and it accumulates from multiple components. So psychological stress can actually accumulate into the same sort of general stress box that you have in your body for all stress, including training stress and diet stress and all that other stuff. So if you say, well, look, the only reason I have high stress is because of psychological reasons, you still have the same amount of high stress, and a deload coming, of course, hopefully with stabler psychological times, can way reduce that and give you a clean slate. So it doesn't so much matter. It matters in some specific cases. It doesn't so much matter where the fatigue came from. If you underperform 2 sessions in a row and you don't have a very good reason for it that's just going to get rectified right after, deloading is a real good idea. And especially if you're in a mesocycle and you know close to what your maximum recoverable volume is. Let's say you've never really done any more than 20 sets of biceps in a week and be able to steadily keep up your performance. It's just too much to recover from. Like, if you're at 19 sets of biceps last week and then this week your performance starts to falter, look, it doesn't require a mystery detective to figure out what the hell is going on. You're probably pushing it and it's probably time to back off. No big deal. So once we have decided to pull the trigger on deloading, how do we do it? Okay. I'm going to give you guys 3 options for hypertrophy deloading. So this is if you're training in a program where hypertrophy is the number 1 goal. We're also going to give you some strength deloading tips in a bit. And if you ask, well, if my program is dedicated to both, you can do a somewhere half in between these, okay? Number 1 way to do it. These are not ranked in order. They're just options. Number 1 way is splitting the deload in all these cases into half weeks. First half of the deload week, second half of the deload week. In the first half of the deload week in way number 1, you drop your volume and you ease up on reps in reserve, get much further away from failure in the first half of the week. And you also drop your load on the bar a ton in the second half. So for example, let's say you do 6 sets of around 10 reps, 300 pounds last week. Okay. And let's say for both beginning of the week and end of the week. It's easy example to just use both at the same time. In the first half of the week, you're going to do 3 sets, half the sets. Okay. 5 reps, half the reps. Huge cut. Remember, if you're going to push on the brakes hard, right? Half the sets, half the reps, but you keep 300 pounds, right? Why? Because heavy loading tends to conserve muscle mass much better, right? So cool, we've conserved all of fitness, no big deal. And then you really need to bring all sources of fatigue down, including joint and connective tissue fatigue in a big way in the second half. So in the second half, you do again 3 sets, again 5 reps, way down anyway, but now it's half the weight, 150 pounds. Geez, that's super easy. By the end of that week, psychologically, you'll be like violent and ready to go and do another killer week, right? So this accomplishes really good things. It lets you get some heavy loading in if you prefer that, if your body can tolerate it, so on and so forth. And it probably maintains a bit more fitness characteristics. There's not that when you start training heavy next week, there's not that as big of a shock of like, oh, holy crap, I haven't done anything heavy in a week. This feels weird. It won't feel weird, but if your joints and connective tissue can take it, this is a really, really good way to go. There is an alternative way, way number 2, okay? Just 2 hypothetical ways. Neither one is better or worse. You can drop your load and RIR in the first half of the week and your volumes as well in the second half. So for example, same example, 6 sets of 10-ish reps at 300 pounds in the last week of accumulation, right? Week 5 or whatever before you deload. In the first half of the deload week, you do 6 sets still of 10-ish reps. That's plenty of volume, but at 150 pounds, half the weight. So these 6 sets of 10, you look at 6 sets of 10 and you're like, crap, that's a fucking deload? That sounds like a workout. But then you look at the 150 pounds and you're like, oh. Like I'm sure a lot of you watching are squatting like something like 300, for sets of 10. Like imagine how hard is it really to squat 150 for a set of 10? Like it's kind of a warm-up. It's literally warm-up. So you basically do 6 warm-ups in a row. It gets you a little pump. It gets you a little blood flow. Nothing to write home about, barely anything. But you get to feel your swag a little bit. And because it's kind of plenty of volume, it'll conserve some adaptations as well. More volume than the other condition, less load than the other condition. And then in the second half of the week, it's almost the same as the second half last time, still 3 sets of 10, but now 150 pounds. All right. So huge, it'll be super, super easy, right? So we just cut the volume, right? Just fewer of the sets. The advantage to this method is this. It doesn't do as good of a job keeping you as psychologically and neurologically strong because it doesn't expose you to the heavy loads, but it lets your joints and connective tissues heal more because even though the volume is a little higher, the load is so low, it's not going to bother your joints hardly at all unless you're really, really broken. That's why the first method is probably better for beginner and intermediate or early intermediate lifters. The second method is something you want to transition into as you get really, really big and really, really strong. Because for example, if you're, let's say, bent rowing 300 pounds, deload, which has you do 300 pounds, but for sets of 5 instead of sets of 10, is still 300 pounds in your hands, on your elbows, in your shoulders, through your lower back. Good God, it is technically a deload, but to your joints and connective tissues, it sometimes isn't. It sure as hell doesn't feel like one. And sometimes folks that are very advanced, by the end of their accumulation, they're so beat up, like in the literal sense, they have so many micro tears in their joints and connective tissues that even getting under the bar for like the same squat weight you normally do, like you got some of the super strong guys in bodybuilding are squatting like 550 for higher reps. Look, 550 at all on your back for almost anyone is just a lot of weight, and you just might not want to do that. It might not be a good idea for joints and connective tissues. Ideally, would it be better theoretically if you could handle it? Yes, but we got to do what we have to do, what we can do, not what we ideally could do. So if you start to do these normal deload weeks, like in point number 1 or process number 1 here, and you're finding that as you get stronger, like the deload works that bring down general fatigue, but you're like, man, my elbows are not healing, like, cause I'm benching heavy still in that deload week and oof, the elbows are just not having it. Try to go a little bit on the lighter side, keep the volume a little moderate, and you might find that that works better for you. Lastly, point number 3, you could just not train at all. That's totally an option. It's fine. It's probably not optimal because there's some muscle retention and some technical retention you can get. And there's also some data that very easy workouts bring down fatigue itself faster than no workouts at all. But that's technical fatigue at a sort of measured perspective. Sometimes just the psychology of the situation is that you just don't want to be in the gym. And sometimes it's cool to take a week off. That's totally fine. Okay, so don't feel like you have to deload. You can just take a week off and just start again. No big deal. If you want to do what's best, deload. Which one of these do you choose? either one of them or anything in between. We'll cover this at the end, but as long as it's super easy compared to regular training, as this clearly is, you're off to a real good start. Next, deloading for strength. A little bit different because load and technique matter for strength more than they do for hypertrophy. So option number one for strength is you drop your load by 10%. Why are we dropping load by 10%? There's no condition here, by the way, in which keeps the load for strength. It's got to be a drop because strength training is so high intensity, so high load. We got to drop it a little bit. Okay? You're not going to be re-hitting your PR you hit last week. You're going to want maybe 10% lower. 10% load drop and volume drop 50% in the first week, and then both drop to 50% of normal in the second half of the deload week. So for example, you do 6 sets of 5-ish at 400 pounds, whatever in the squat or deadlift. In the last week, first workout or early in the week workout would be still 3 sets of 5 at 360 pounds. Now notice, that's pretty tough, okay? That is no joke, right? And as you get stronger and stronger, you may not want to do that sort of thing. But if you're a beginner and intermediate, that's totally fine. It does actually, 6 sets of 5, 400, that'll beat you to death. 3 sets of 5 at 360, it's nothing to write home about. And it'll probably feel like when you leave, you're like, oh, that was okay. That wasn't too bad. And then a lot of fatigue will drop because it's literally having the volume and 10% down by weight. And then the second half of that week, still 3 sets, still 5 reps, but at 200 pounds, half of 400. I mean, that's just going to feel super, super easy and for sure going to drop all the rest of your fatigue. Right? Option number 2 is kind of more of that, similar to option number 2 in the hypertrophy example. You drop your load and volume by 50% the entire time. Okay, so 6 sets of 5 for 400 pounds in the last week, super mega workout, the best you can do. And then 3 sets, half the sets, 5-ish reps, still the same reps. So you're not going to cut a whole lot of reps. You're doing 5, that's low anyway. At 200 pounds though, both halves, okay? Why is this method better? Same reason, because it lets your joints and connective tissues heal. For bigger and stronger lifters, look, sometimes after you've benched 400 or squatted 500 or deadlifted 600 for reps in that last week of super psycho volumes and intensities and everything, RPE 10 type of shit, you're just not putting that amount of weight on the bar anymore and nothing close. Like if you're really, really messed up from 400 pound benches, 360 is not easy, okay? If you've been doing 400 pound deadlifts and you have to deadlift 360 and you're more of an intermediate, that might be like super doable, right? So a lot of this really depends on how close to the limit of adaptation a lifter is and how objectively high these numbers are, right? And just like with the hypertrophy example, anything in between is totally fine. And even some stuff outside the bounds is fine. Now, here's the thing. Unlike with hypertrophy training, taking a week off completely from strength training is less of a good idea, relatively speaking. Why? Because taking time off completely from strength training can degrade your technique meaningfully. Technique is more important. The specific groove you're taking, your sort of athleticism, and being able to execute very, very fine technique is more important in strength training because it's a skill versus hypertrophy training where you just blast muscles and you're good to go as long as your technique is fine, right? So you don't want to lose that mojo, and you might lose it a little bit if you take a whole week off, you feel real rusty coming back. And that's a very, very common thing. Not everyone feels like that. So for folks that don't, a week off is fine, but give it some thought. If you're in strength training, it's probably better to do a much lighter week, much easier week of deloading and make it very light and easy. Even lighter and easier than option number 2 is probably better by a considerable degree than taking a week off altogether, because then you come back and you're not beat up at all because the weights were super light and the volumes are super low, but you did practice the techniques, and especially practicing techniques when they're light and super easy, you can expand your technical groove and make it even better. So then when you enter week 1 of the next plan, because remember, the point isn't just to drop the fatigue, it's to drop the fatigue and drop minimum adaptations. When you enter week 1 of your next plan, not only is the fatigue gone, but you're feeling real crisp on the lifts versus finishing off the fatigue with a complete week off, coming into the first week, you're like, what the hell is lifting? What the hell is a barbell, right? And sometimes it can feel really awkward even after a week, especially for folks that are training strength and power sports like weightlifting. Very unusual for weightlifting deloads to take an entire week off. Strength training deloads, powerlifting, strongman, a little bit more common, still very uncommon. Bodybuilding, ton of people instead of deloading take weeks off and it's totally fine. So that's how that kind of stacks up. Here's the deal. Closing remarks on this to wrap it all up. Everything I gave are just examples and they work, but they don't work ideally for everyone. So feel free to just take inspiration from them. You can do them verbatim, no problem. But if you just take inspiration from them and modify them to how it works best for you, then that's absolutely totally cool, right? Just remember that deloading has to be much easier than regular training, and especially towards the last half of the deload week, you should feel your fatigue going away. You should feel fresher, sharper. Your desire to train should be more elevated, right? By the Friday of deloading, you should be like, swear to God, if someone doesn't put a barbell in front of me, I'm going to kill, right? That's how you want to feel. If by Friday, your deload week was so hard that you're like, man, crap, I got a new meso starting Monday. Like, you're in a bad place. Because remember, you have to buy yourself enough fatigue clearance time to do another 4 to 8 weeks of accumulation. Holy crap. You better be feeling 100% by the end of that deload. If it's anything less, you're doing too much. And here's the last thing. If you have a deload session and you leave that session with big pump, okay, or having hit PRs, like I've literally seen people post videos like, did a deload, hit a PR, like what in the name of God about deloading connotes PRs? Nothing, it's the opposite of PRs. If you're doing that, you're not deloading. Doesn't matter what you say in your notebook, and you're going to pay for it in the next mesocycle. The worst way to pay, of course, is injury, but highly unlikely. The second worst, but nonetheless really annoying way to pay is you sort of deload, go too heavy, go too hard, do too much volume, and you're pretty much fine because you did drop some fatigue. Not enough. In that next several weeks, let's say you planned a 6-week accumulation, and this is real nasty. I've had this happen to me a bunch in clients and everyone. Week 1, you feel great. Week 2, you feel okay. Week 3, the fatigue catches up to you because it's exponential and you feel awful. And someone's like, week 4, right? And you're like, nope. And then you got to take a deload in the middle of your mesocycle. And look, if you have a show planned or planned vacation where you want to look ripped, or you plan your mass mesocycles together, you're throwing off the plan. And that sucks, right? It sucks. It's great to know I'm going to hit my peak and I'm going to back off and I'm going to hit all those PRs. It's going to be great. It sucks to hit the similar number of objective PRs, but have 1 week in the middle of your meso where you fall apart. You didn't know it was coming, right? Don't do that. Plan to deload. Detect when you need to deload with an underperformance, and when you deload, cut back big, come back stronger, and you'll be doing a real good job getting the strength you need, getting the hypertrophy you need over the long term, and that's where it counts. Now, you might be asking yourself a question after this video. Okay, I'm done deloading. I had this great productive mesocycle of hypertrophy training, for example. How do I construct my next mesocycle? Do I just start the weights that I did in the last week? Do I start some lighter weights? What do I do with volumes? Folks, guess what? The next video we're going to post in the series answers all of those questions, and I'll see you then.